Some people in the audience know me, and they know that whenever I'm asked where I come from, I always say I'm a humble guy that comes from the parking lot of Venice. So there you have it, the Liberty Bridge, Il Ponte della Libertà, that connects the historic center of Venice to its mainland. And you can find me right on the other side of the bridge. There it is, Mestre, one of the idyllic mainland boroughs of the municipality of Venice, whose economy almost entirely depends on the tourists who want to visit Venice at a low cost. So they book their cheap hotel rooms near my beautiful maison. And I'm telling you this not only to give you a little background about who I am, but also because it relates to one of the problems we're going to deal with today, overtourism. So I want to start this talk with a personal story. I remember it was November 13th, 2019, when, the day after what I would later come to know as the second worst flooding in the past century, I decided to take a trip to Venice. So while many of my friends who went to school to Venice were sharpening their FIFA skills on the PS4, because of course all the schools were shut down, I asked my dad for a ride to the lagoon. So we crossed the Liberty Bridge and we arrived at Piazzale Roma, the square at the entrance of the city. After saying goodbye to my dad, I started walking towards Piazza San Marco, St. Mark's Square, at the very heart of the city. And I started feeling the cold, smelly lagoon water gradually rising to my knees and soaking my pants. And what I saw once I came in front of St. Mark's Basilica was truly a dreadful scene. La Basilica di San Marco and the surrounding square were buried under almost 2 feet of water. Palazzo Ducale, seat of the Doge, the supreme authority of the former Republic of Venice, had been completely submerged. The 2019 flood was an abrupt wake-up call for the city and for the world. You know, Venice is a fascinating oddity. This fish-shaped UNESCO World Heritage Site is built on more than 100 islands on the Venetian lagoon, linked by an intricate network of canals and bridges. Exceptional high tides, the so-called acque alte, have always been typical of the lagoon's natural phenomena, occurring on a periodic basis due to the combination of seasonal winds and heavy rain. And that's why if you live in Venice, you really want to have one of these in front of your doorstep. These are called paratie, or bulkheads in English, and they're meant to prevent water from entering your house during acque alte events. But it was clear that this time was different, and not even le paratie would be enough. The 2019 acque alta was rather a sign of the gloomy forecast for the future of the city, and recent patterns indicating that we wouldn't be waiting 50 years for another disastrous inundation were pretty spot on in their predictions. On November 22nd, 2022, another extreme high tide episode of a scale comparable to the one in 2019 would have catastrophically hit Venice again if the city hadn't implemented its best climate adaptation solution so far. The engineering marvel known as MOSE, il modulo sperimentale elettromagnetico, is a system of 78 rectangular steel barriers that are inflated with air and lifted from the sea surface anytime high tides jeopardize the city. The MOSE project started about 40 years ago, in the 1980s. It cost approximately 6 billion euros, but it's effectively shielding Venice from floods. So, okay, you might think we are done. I mean, we already saved Venice from sinking, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. Because there's a fundamental problem with MOSE. The dam system could stop operating efficiently with a rising sea level of only 30 centimeters, meaning that in a not distant future, we would see Venice become a modern-day Atlantis, succumbing beneath the waves together with its irreplaceable UNESCO heritage. So it's clear that the MOSE, despite its admirable scale and efficiency, is just a temporary solution that can buy us time to make some necessary strides in other directions. But the threats faced by Venice go well beyond the sheer risk of being swallowed by the sea. There are at least 2 other villains the city has to reckon with, named overtourism and depopulation. Now, I don't want to bore you with facts and figures, but just consider this. In 2019, Venice hosted a number of visitors that was approximately 680 times the proportion of its 50,000 residents. Among the many issues linked to overtourism, one of the most pressing is certainly the degradation caused by tourism-related pollution, both to the city's historical buildings and to the fragile ecosystem of the lagoon. But we also have the problems of affordability and depopulation that are intrinsically related, since the skyrocketing housing costs in the historic center of the city, largely induced as a byproduct of overtourism, are driving its unceasing depopulation. So how do we do this? How is it possible to save and revitalize a city that is literally dying in front of our eyes? Well, what I suggest today is that the development and implementation of new business production models and technological solutions have the potential to successfully achieve this purpose. Of course, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals represent an urgent call to action not only for states, but also for companies that must implement dramatic changes if we want to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So we saw it, Venice is a miniature version of basically all the ills that UN SDGs aim to alleviate. But it also has all it takes to become an open-air lab for sustainability innovation and energy transition. And there are strong reasons to believe this. First, because of Venice's international visibility and mediatic resonance. Being such a unique and iconic site also means that every innovation that is tested and presented in Venice can quickly see a huge worldwide spread. But this also means that the city has a high potential for attracting international start-uppers, researchers, and young minds from all over the world. I dare you to find one student who wouldn't want to study here at least for one semester of exchange, or an employee who wouldn't want to enjoy the wonders of Venice at least for some time. When considering the points of strength that would make Venice the perfect candidate for an open-air sustainability lab, we must not forget its contained dimensions, thanks to which the city could concentrate a hotspot of experimentation within a walkable area of only 5 square kilometers. But Venice can act as the ideal catalyst for sustainable development, also thanks to its mainland resources. The parking lot of Venice actually has the concrete potential to turn into a green hydrogen hub, producing 100% clean energy. This is due to a large number of factors, including the institutional endorsement of decarbonization in the past decades, with the enforcement of industrial policies in favor of hydrogen, as well as the abundant availability of renewables in the region of Veneto. You must know that only 10 minutes away from my house is the port and industrial district known as Porto Marghera. Porto Marghera used to be one of the most important industrial hubs in Italy, thanks to the prominent role played by its heavy industry during the economic boom of the 50s and 60s. You know, among all the romantic places in the world you can possibly think of, the first time my grandpa, Luciano, was bewitched, hopefully, by my grandma Anna, and he asked her out for a Campari Spritz, was when they used to work together in the industrial district of Marghera, in a healthy environment made of bright red industrial fumes, PCBs, and dioxins. But today, you rarely see Porto Marghera hit the headlines. In fact, since the mid-70s, the industrial district has experienced a declining process of deindustrialization, with a loss of about 2/3 of the employees that used to work there in the 60s, and almost half of its area now abandoned. But you know what the amazing thing is? We can recover and decarbonize the still energy-intensive and hard-to-abate industry of Porto Marghera by producing green hydrogen there and using this clean energy to fuel its plants. But that's not all. Green hydrogen could also be used to decarbonize the means of public transportation in Venice, with hybrid vaporetti, the water buses, as well as electric buses. And that's precisely what large Italian companies like Eni, Enel, and Snam, among others, are working towards under the coordination of the Veneto region. You must know that only 9 minutes a vélo from my house, last year, the first hydrogen refueling station in Italy for road mobility was opened by Eni. But we must also keep in mind that Venice could seize the unique opportunity offered by the favorable circumstances of the present time. After a decade driven by remarkable IT and digital advancements, we're now getting acquainted with a new revolutionary wave of innovation, propelled by startups, but also by incumbent firms, bringing together disruptive deep tech solutions like nanotechnology, quantum computing, and artificial intelligence. Heralded as the fourth wave of innovation, the deep tech trend that is now gaining momentum opens up endless potential for a paradigm shift towards sustainability. And this is because the very nature of deep tech ventures is problem-oriented and not technology-driven, which means that we're not searching for the best use case to apply a specific technology, but rather what we're looking for is the best technology, whether new or already in place, to solve an existing problem. And this issue-oriented approach can be extremely effective in reaching the SDGs targets defined by the UN. So, We saw that we have great dangers for Venice, great potential, but what else? What's already been put in place, and what are the next steps? Promoting the relaunch of the Venetian socio-economic model in an environmental, social, and governance perspective is precisely what the VSF, the Venice Sustainability Foundation, aims to realize. The VSF was formed a bit more than 1 year ago, in March 2022, under the presidency of economist and politician Renato Brunetta, and with Venice Mayor Luigi Brugnaro and Veneto Region President Luca Zaia as VPs. The foundation's sphere of action is organized around 10 thematic areas pertinent to Venice's sustainable development, among which there's the ambitious project of a green hydrogen hub in Porto Marghera, we just discussed. There's also the field related to the implementation of a sustainable tourism model for Venice. But the thematic area that most closely connects to today's topic is certainly entrepreneurial sustainability, innovation, and acceleration. And playing a pivotal role in this domain of intervention is the non-profit accelerator of Ca' Foscari University of Venice, Venezia, which stands for Venice Sustainability Innovation Accelerator, and which targets a wide range of SDGs. And for those of you who have literally no clue what an accelerator is, well, an accelerator is basically a program or an organization whose purpose is to speed up the development of startups, in this case, sustainable innovation startups, by offering funding, training, and access to networking opportunities. So picture this, there's a spark or a small fire, that's your startup, and you pour fuel on it to amplify it and make it burn hotter and brighter. At this point, you might ask, sorry, but why do we need an accelerator in the first place? Well, that's because the growth of the deep tech wave of innovation is confronted with several challenges. We must keep in mind that the success or failure of deep tech ventures relies on being able to access funding and scale up their technological solutions. We must also remember that deep tech is placed at the convergence of multiple disciplinary fields, like science and engineering, but also design. Hence, the need for a highly interconnected ecosystem provided by the acceleration program that would support those startups and companies and allow them to thrive thanks to a ripple effect, a positive chain reaction set in motion and echoed throughout the accelerator's ecosystem. And this would allow these new business ideas and tech solutions to rapidly scale at a national and global level. Now, let me give you one example of how Venice is successfully accelerating sustainable startups working towards the SDGs. The Future Farming Initiative is a project of technology transfer acceleration launched last year, whose aim is to create a biofoundry based on commercial and industrial programs in Venice. In plain language, a biofoundry is this cutting-edge facility offering a platform to rapidly speed up scientific advancement in the developing bioeconomic field. You must know that future farming is a new domain, a new way of conceiving farming that merges two deep tech trends: controlled environment agriculture, CEA, on the one side, and nature co-design on the other. CEA is essentially the agricultural production in controlled environments that allows us to maximize crop yields while minimizing the employment of natural resources and reducing the use of pesticides. Nature co-design, instead, is the idea of seeing nature as a manufacturing platform, which means that rather than going through the exploitative process of environmental resources to obtain the final product, let's go straight to that product by manipulating individual atoms and constructing molecules with the properties of interest. Let's have, say, a scoop of gelato, of ice cream, without milking cattle, or a cell-based beefsteak without butchering any cow. Future farming is the idea that for the first time in human history, we have the possibility to transition from a strictly extractive linear economic model to one definable as generative circular, perfectly consistent with the direction of the SDGs. So what is the accelerator doing in its Future Farming initiative? Well, the accelerator is mainly developing a systematic venture creation process. You know, a venture is a business activity involving a high degree of uncertainty or risk. It's like a sailor setting out alone on this flimsy boat in pursuit of an unknown but potentially very fortunate destination. And the accelerator is helping this boat dock at the best possible port by permitting future farming ventures to get funding and gain access to the market via the partnership with established industrial firms. So you see how the acceleration program involves this integrated ecosystem of actors and creates a straightforward link between intellectual property stakeholders, on the one hand, and the market, the real industrial needs, on the other, with potentially exponential gains in terms of innovative industrial applications, And Venice is doing all of this despite not being a profit center. Before concluding, let's talk about the ultimate mission of the VSF and Venezia. And that is to make a sustainability accelerator not only in Venice, but an accelerator out of Venice, transforming it into the oldest city of the future. Wow, nice slogan, sounds good, right? But what does it actually mean? Well, this would mean attracting investments, human capital, and young talents from every corner of the world. This would mean repopulating the city with a badly needed community of smart workers, researchers, engineers, artists, policymakers, interested in a unique living and working experience in Venice, and no more just in a one-day tourist visit. Finally, this would mean creating a new affordable kind of housing and revitalizing the local social economy while preserving the invaluable cultural heritage of the city. I want to leave it today with one last final address. Now, forgive me for this very romantic ideal, but after all, I'm here on a Saturday afternoon to give you an idea worth spreading. And so, what my path on sustainability and my experiences in Iceland, in Milan at Expo 2015, in Dubai at Expo 2020, in Reims, and of course, in Venice, have taught me, is that sustainability is much more than just climate mitigation and adaptation. Sustainability, to me, is rather the irreplaceable opportunity our generation has through joint efforts to really make a paradigm shift and bring every single human being to a next improved level of thinking, acting, and living. And that's what I firmly believe we, the generation that has been showing such extraordinary resilience in facing a pandemic, have the power to do here and now on April 22nd, 2023. Our generation, you and me, have a sustainable future in our hands. A future that we have the power and duty to write together. So let's make it true. Thank you very much.